And that, my friends, is how America was made great once again. Breaking at this hour, Jimmy Sengenberger is currently at the crossroads of politics and economics. Radio broadcaster master, now the celeb on the web. He's the smarty of the party. He's in cahoots with the grassroots. Jimmy at the Crossroads brings you thought-provoking commentary, hard-hitting interviews, original satire, and the best bumper music known to man. Jimmy at the Crossroads!
Gonna talk money, gonna talk politics, with all generations. Oh, what a great mix, I said. Gonna talk money, gonna talk politics, grateful to all generations. Oh, what a great mix. I got Jimmy at the Crossroads, making sense out of nonsense. People want answers, they want to understand. They come to the crossroads and Jimmy gives them the plan. I said, gonna talk money, gonna talk politics, great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix. I got Jimmy at the crossroads, making sense out of nonsense. Come on, Jimmy, what you got?
Hello, my friends, and welcome back to another edition of Jimmy at the Crossroads. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger, your host for the program. Great to be back in the saddle after a couple of days missing in action, not because I wanted to, but more out of necessity. You see, overnight, Wednesday into Thursday, my car was stolen at a complex. All my harmonicas were in there, by the way, which was such a devastating disappointment. Getting some more sent in later this week. Maybe I'll have the opportunity to play a little bit here on Jimmy at the Crossroads, but man, has it been a tough several days. Haven't heard anything. No news whatsoever. Alas, here we are. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger. Great to be with you here on Jimmy at the Crossroads, coming to you in partnership with the Washington Examiner. And we will today be doing our level best to make sense out of nonsense and, of course, bring you engaging, intelligent talk, Sang style, as we do every time we're here. Today, in just a little bit, we will be joined by Chris Burns of Dynamic Money rejoining the show, as well as Vance Ginn, who is the chief economist at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. We're going to talk with both of them about the state of the economy and the state of the markets, where things are going. That's at the bottom of the hour today here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. But first, Warner Brothers is disarming two of its most famous characters. On its new HBO Max streaming service, Warner Bros. Isn't going to be allowing Yosemite Sam, Elmer, Fudd, or any other characters to have guns of any kind. Now, anvils are still okay. Dynamite and explosions are still okay. There are a list of things that are still okay. Cannons, but not guns, which marked those characters for years. Many a child clearly was scarred over the decades by Looney Toons having guns. So what is a talk show host to do when two loony citizens lose their constitutionally protected right to keep and bear arms? Well, of course, it's to interview the two of them. Elmer Fudd and Yosemite Sam, the two most signature characters of Acme Toontown, who had firearms on the show. I caught up with them over the weekend in an exclusive interview. Let's share it for you here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. I'm here today with a couple of characters who last week it was announced had just lost their constitutionally protected right to keep and bear arms, and without due process.
Yes, and due process is very important.
Pleased to be joined via the phone for an exclusive interview by Mr. Elmer Fudd and Mr. Yosemite Sam. Guys, welcome to the show.
Oh, it's a real privilege and honor to be here at the Crossroads, where we can separate sense from nonsense.
So let me go to you first, Mr. Elmer Fudd. What exactly is going on here? I'm kind of confused as to what's happening.
Well, that wascally mayor of Acme Toontown has it in for us. He's got me in his crosshairs because he's sick of getting blasted all the time. But in my defense, I get a little confused with all the duck season, rabbit season, tarantula season, quarantine season, mask season. I don't even know if it's going to be NFL season this year or not.
So since you mentioned the mayor of Acme Toontown, Mayor Daffy Dem, I want to play an excerpt from yesterday's press conference with the mayor and then get Yosemite's reaction.
A foghorn bullhorn here from the Daily Squawk. Your Honor, why do you want to seize all the firearms?
I don't trust them not to blow each other's beaks off. They're deplorables.
The mayor's making more clatter than a skeleton having a fit on a tin roof while they're pillaging his village.
Yosemite Sam, your reaction.
Oh, I get so angry at that. Oh, by the way, Jimmy, it's pronounced Yosemite, Sam. I just thought I'd clear it up. Ah, you blamed idiot liberals, always taking away our guns and ignoring the Bill of Rights, lefts, and uppercuts. It's right there in the second commandment of the Constitution.
I think you mean Second Amendment to the Constitution and just Bill of Rights.
What he said.
So, gentlemen, I want to ask you about a criticism that has been leveled, an explanation, too, for why this has been happening to you both in terms of you being disarmed. Some will say that you are irresponsible gun owners and therefore shouldn't be allowed to own guns in the first place. What do you say to that?
Irresponsible? Well, if I'm not going to use a gun, what am I going to use? A dragon? They're real hard to reload. Why would anybody take us seriously? We're Looney Tunes. Yeah, it's right there in the name. Looney Tunes. We're crazy, kooky, madcat cut-ups. We're into antics, not Antifa. Stay at home and watch classic Looney Tunes, where I hunt with a real rifle, and I'm not stifled.
I want to ask you one more question on a different topic. There's a lot more happening in the world today. We've got protests and riots, even calls to defund the police. I'm curious your thoughts on all the craziness happening in the world today.
Ah, those blame idiot snowflakes. When they looted the Acme warehouse, they stole all the anvils, mallets, cannons, and dynamite. You can't defund the police. If you're going to get looted, who you going to call? Ghostbusters?
Well, don't call me. I don't even know how to play a lute.
Yeah, and what happens if the Ghostbusters do show up? I mean, they won't have their proton packs and their neutrino rods. They'll have a Coca-Cola and Mentos. And the Transformers? One of those transforms into a giant gun. What's he going to transform into? A Twizzler? Star Wars, that's my favorite. And if Han Solo wouldn't have had his blaster, Guido would have got the drop on him. It would have been a real short movie.
Well, gentlemen, unfortunately, we are out of time. Mr. Elmer Fudd and Mr. Yosemite Sam, so great to have you both here. Thanks for taking the time today.
Thanks for having us. We had a riot. Now get out there and, well, on second thought, turn around and go back in the house. It's not really safe out there.
Okay, so that was wacky. That was intentionally wacky. But intentionally so because that's what these characters are about. Right now, Warner Bros. Is taking things too seriously about animated cartoon characters that are just about fun. I don't think any kid took any wrong idea from what was happening with Elmer Fudd hunting wabbits or Yosemite Sam or any of the other violence happening in those Looney Tune cartoons. What we're seeing here across the country with discussions even now of getting rid of Paw Patrol is absurd. We're not quite at peak absurdity, as our friend Keith Nobles would say, but we're almost there. We're almost to peak absurdity. and it just keeps getting sillier and sillier. We need to get a grip as a society. Let kids be kids. Keep letting Looney Tunes be loony, and let's have some fun. After all, fun is one of the spices of life. Of course, that interview from over the weekend, what an exclusive, getting Elmer Fudd and Yosemite Sam on this very show. Nathan Matoush is our producer extraordinaire, working the Matoush magic day in and day out. And he joins me for some special reaction before we head off to have some economic conversations. Mr. Matoush, good to be back here with you, my friend. I know you're doing a little bit more adjustments of your camera right there, but I think that's about as good as it's gonna get. Let's just bring you right on. There we go. Well done. Well played. Nathan Matoush, producer extraordinaire. Is your mic on?
Test. Yeah.
Yeah, there we go.
We're on. How you doing, my friend?
You know, I'm doing okay. Hanging in there. So what'd you make of that exclusive?
I thought that was very interesting. I think we could learn a lot from watching previous cartoons and diving into our childhood past. That was quite the conversation. Very fascinating.
Yeah, well, these poor guys have been disarmed by their local government, by the council of Warner Bros. And it's disheartening. You could hear the pain in their voice.
That's right. And I mean, just remember, this is not just affecting the American people, Jimmy. This is affecting the Looney Tunes. This is affecting the cartoons, our childhood past. It's affecting our future, our present, and our past.
Yeah. No, I think so. But isn't it, speaking seriously though, isn't it ridiculous how they're doing this thing with regards to, I mean, no kid ever thought, oh, Elmer Fudd just shot the beak off of Daffy Duck, so I'm scared or something. I mean, seriously.
Yeah. No, I mean, I don't think anyone ever would predict something like that. I mean, that's just, well said. What a well-done interview, Jimmy.
Well, thank you. Well, sometimes, we have to get right to the heart of the matter and get deep into the story and actually talk with the characters involved. Nathan Matoush, thank you.
Thank you, Jimmy. Thanks for sharing once again.
Producer extraordinaire here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. So in just a few moments, we will be joined by Vance Ginn, who is chief economist at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. We'll also be joined by Chris Burns, CEO of Dynamic Money, a past guest on this program. And together they're going to give perspective on the economy, where things are at, where things are headed, and then also the stock market and investing, what people should keep in mind in that regard, how certain economic policies or state of the economy may impact where the stock market goes, and more. We will talk about it with Vance Ginn and Chris Burns in just a matter of moments. Keep it right here. You're watching Jimmy at the Crossroads, coming in partnership with the Washington Examiner.
America's politics are crazy. The culture is in flux. That's why we work hard to help you keep up.
More politics, more culture, and more access.
We focus on the biggest stories of the day with some of the biggest names in politics and punditry.
Go to our website, WashingtonExaminer.com. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Concerned about that trade deficit? Looking for that magic solution? I'm Bill of Goods for ScamWow, the tariff towel. It's like a tax. It's like a fee. It's like a penalty. This tariff really sucks up the trade deficit. And the jobs we'll save are tremendous. This is for the House, the Senate, the POTUS. You'll be saying crap every time you use the ScamWow tariff towel. Look at this. It just does the work. Why wouldn't you want to pay twice the price for that washing machine? How much would you pay for this tariff? It'll make this microwave seem like it's brand new. And at only twice the price. Look at the way the tariff towel cleans your clock. Wow, look at that. So clean, you can see the future. You can see future tariffs coming from a mile away. Look at the way it polishes these stars. Boy, if that don't make you feel patriotic, huh?
I love paying extra. I don't even worry about it anymore, since the trade deficit will go down.
Look at this tariff. I love this tariff. It's like a security blanket.
All I can say is, scam, wow!
ScamWow compels other nations to use their own tariff towels on our stuff, making our goods more expensive overseas. Whoopee.
The micro tariff is for everything. For lumber, for steel, even solar panels. It'll melt that trade deficit down. I don't know. It sells itself, America. The ScamWow sells for 25%. But if you call in the next 20 minutes, because we can't do this all term, we'll give you the second tariff absolutely free. That's 4 tariffs for 25%. And it comes with a 5-year warranty. Here's how to order.
Call 1-800-RIP-YOU-OFF. ScamWow is not available in capitalism and is made in Washington. Beware of ScamWow grift. 1-800-RIP-YOU-OFF. Call now.
You're an entrepreneur.
I'll give you the alternative.
You're an entrepreneur.
Sure.
You've got to create 30 million jobs over 3 years.
Yeah.
Tell me what companies can do that.
So, first
tell me
of
what
all,
20 or 50 or 100 companies can do that.
I can't tell you a specific companies that can do that because I don't know. In fact,
Or investors.
But
Pick
what I
the
don't,
greatest investors of
right.
all time.
Well, but I don't presume to think that I know who's going to be the best investor, the best company to do that. Just as I don't think the government is, that I can presume that the government's going to be effective to do that.
Gonna talk money, gonna talk politics, great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix, I said.
Has been on a determined campaign to convince the world that everything is hunky-dory. And when the government actually spends so much effort trying to convince you of something, you got to be very suspicious.
Your lawyers don't tell you even all the evidence that the government has given them, the few meager disclosures that were made literally at the 11th hour after you'd already been coerced into pleading guilty.
Hours of video evidence of Nancy Pelosi coming up on your porches and jujitsuing your precious packages, while Chuck Schumer waits in the street in the getaway van because he's too afraid to be a man and do his own dirty work.
Come on, Jimmy, what you got?
Is it scary that YouTube and Twitter and Facebook have this kind of power over us? Of course it is. But you know what? These things didn't always exist, and they won't always exist. David beat Goliath. The little guy can beat the big guy.
So we have to figure out ways to fight in which we are able to have that kind of reach. We can build our own megaphones. And this is a little bit of a longer term project. It goes beyond Trump's re-election because it affects every election.
I'm good, man. It's a partnership. We're like this, Jimmy. I got you.
Jimmy, can I tell you that I've done about 200 shows in the last 3 weeks for this book tour? This has been by far my favorite interview.
And that, my friends, is how America was made great once again. Breaking at this hour, Jimmy Sengenberger is currently at the crossroads of politics and economics. Radio broadcaster master. Now the celeb on the web. He's the smarty of the party. He's in cahoots with the grassroots. Jimmy at the Crossroads brings you thought-provoking commentary, hard-hitting interviews, original satire, and the best bumper music known to man. Jimmy at the Crossroads.
I got Jimmy at the crossroads, making sense out of no sense.
And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Jimmy at the Crossroads with your host, Jimmy Sengenberger. Let's get you back right to the set. Jimmy Sengenberger, folks.
Happy Monday, one and all. Welcome back to Jimmy at the Crossroads. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger, your host for the program. Again, coming to you in partnership with the Washington Examiner here on a Monday. If you have not subscribed to the YouTube channel, please do. YouTube.com/Jimmy at the Crossroads. Jimmy at the Crossroads on YouTube, the place to go. Also, Be sure to like the Facebook page, Jimmy Sengenberger Media Personality, facebook.com/Jimmy Sengenberger Pro, as well as follow me on Twitter. You see it right there. At Sang Center, that's Sang with an E, not an A, Center on Twitter. And also be sure to follow our friends and partners at the Washington Examiner, WashingtonExaminer.com, and on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. In just a moment here on the program, we're going to bring on two very special guests to talk about both the economy and the markets and get a little interesting discussion going on with Vance Ginn and Chris Burns. But first, justice friends, superheroes have to look their best. Do you remember a superhero who wasn't well groomed? I do. It was Chubby Thor. Odin's son was not representing, and nobody was scruffy man enough to point it out. Don't do that to your superhero dad. With great grooming comes great responsibility. After Dad leaves his fortress of solitude, the bathroom, he wants to come out of his dad cave, having transformed from Shaggy Man into Scruffy Man. ScruffyMan.com is your source for dad's grooming power. Groomers Assemble, the beard grooming kit for men. It's got everything you need for daily grooming. The state-of-the-art Mk2 Razor is made from the same aluminum as the UH-60 Black Hawk helicopter. You'll think Stark himself designed it for your Iron Man. Make sure your superhero dad is Scruffy Man. He'll look his best faster than a speeding razor, able to cut through jungles of hair in a single swipe. So log on to ScruffyMan.com today. You'll get free shipping for all orders over $49, and your gift will arrive quick as a flash. Use the promo code Jimmy and Shazam. You'll get an additional 20% off Father's Day discounts. Last chance to do this, folks, for Father's Day. That's ScruffyMan.com, and use the promo code Jimmy at checkout. Appreciate our friend and sponsor at ScruffyMan.com. All right, so without further ado, the economy has been shaken up because of the coronavirus pandemic and the government shutdowns that forced economies to a standstill across the nation. Also, we're now seeing riots that have swept the country over the last few weeks, though they've tempered down a good bit, thankfully, but a lot of destruction around the country. Stock market has been ebbing and flowing, seemingly getting more positive overall. But what's really going on here? Let's talk about both of those aspects of things, the economy and the stock market, with Vance Ginn, who is chief economist at the Texas Public Policy Foundation, as well as Chris Burns, who's CEO of Dynamic Money and Markets Guru himself. Gentlemen, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
The Scruffy Man applies.
Yes.
I've taken some time here.
It definitely applies. I had you in mind as I was doing the read and seeing you over the other box. I was like, I could see if anybody fits, it's him more than me or Vance. That's for sure.
Well, my kids are pushing me. They feel like it's never going to happen again. So now is the time. So
there you go. Makes sense. All right, gentlemen, well, it's good to have you both. I appreciate it. I want to start here before we dive into the conversation by playing Cut 2. This is Larry Kudlow yesterday, chief economic advisor on CNN's State of the Union, talking about some of the current state of play economically.
I personally agree with you. I think people want to go back to work, and I think they welcome the reopening of the economy, and I think they're anxious to get out and about. However, at the margin, incentives do matter. And so we've heard from business after business, industry after industry, and there's already some evidence that this effect is taking place. Now, mind you, let me repeat, we are not going to remove unemployment benefits. That will still continue, and there will be some return to work benefit. It won't be quite as substantial. This is a turning point in the economy. Besides the great jobs numbers, you've had a lot of positive green shoot indicators, Jake, and we don't want to interrupt that. Besides the job figures, you're going to get big retail sales numbers reported next week on Tuesday. Already department and merchandise sales week to week are above year-ago levels. You've got an Apple Mobility Index index that's practically pre-pandemic, showing that people are traveling. You've got new business applications are skyrocketing. And by the way, small businesses are now about 80% reopening. So this is all positive news coming off the pandemic. We are in the recovery stage.
Right. I mean, there's still 40 million Americans unemployed, and we are in a recession.
All right, let's start with the PhD economist on the crew today. Vance Ginn, your thoughts on the economy and what Kudlow had to say there.
The key points here, when you think about we have bottomed out, the unemployment rate was down to a little over 14%, now a little over 13%. You saw a massive number of people who were laid off in May. Things were starting to look a little bit better. In April, and then things were looking better in May with the latest jobs report. So some of those things I think are good signs for the economy. A lot of that has to do with phasing out a lot of these shutdowns. I'm in Texas right now. The shutdowns really started to phase out May 1st. So there's been more economic activity. More people are getting jobs again, and that's a great sign for the American economy overall. And look, there's still some things, there's still some road bumps along the way that we need to get over, but we're going to get there soon as long as we have pro-growth policies in place.
So in terms of the economic malaise, to what extent do you think it's because of the virus itself, Vance, versus the policies of the economic shutdown that we've seen across the country?
Well, when you look at the numbers that were showing the mobility, or people actually moving around, maybe even open table, going to restaurants, some of that had already slowed down before the shutdowns happened. When you look at early March, a lot of the shutdowns happened mid-March. And so there was going to be a slowdown in economic activity. People stayed home more often, things of that nature. But the shutdown certainly exacerbated the problem. And maybe rightfully so when you think about the policies that were put in place. But I still want to think about what Milton Friedman said: don't judge a policy by its intentions, but by its results. And so what we've seen over time is the slowing down of the economy. More people are unemployed. And we've got to think about how that is influencing people's lives at the same time as the coronavirus did along the way.
Yeah, the thing that's been so striking has been how different states, Vance, have handled this differently. So you've had some that have been more restrictive than others. But no matter how restrictive or less restrictive a state is, it is impacting the national economy. We may be seeing 50 different state policies, but when we look at the overall economy and the economic data, GDP numbers and what have you, a more locked-down state can have a significant impact on the overall economy, as might a less lockdown state.
No, that's right. And I mean, when you look at the latest jobs report, showed 3.1 million new private sector jobs were added. That's phenomenal, right? And even if you dive deeper in there, what you'll notice is a lot of them were about 240,000 of them were dentists, right? And dentistry, some of these sort of procedures that were taking place were shut down entirely, so now they're starting to go back to work, which is a good sign. And I think what you'll see soon when the state and local jobs report comes out by BLS is that you're going to have this kind of dichotomy between the states that are opening up a little bit faster versus those who are still shut down at that point in time. And in particular, I think you'll see the red states versus blue states, where you see more red states opening up faster, getting more job creation, that sort of thing happening. And unfortunately, that's going to lead to more unequal growth and higher, income inequality just between the states. Where do you really want to work, open your business? The places where I know I'm going to get a source of revenue and not be dependent on more government intervention, maybe the PPP or some other sort of program that's out there.
Sure. Chris Burns, CEO of Dynamic Money, what's your sense for the overall economy, especially as someone who sees how the market reacts to the different machinations that we see?
Yeah, the market's really fickle, and we have to remember that because we saw this incredible drop, and we're just getting a feel now for what that meant. I mean, literally, the data just came out that close to a third of the Wall Street Journal reports of folks over the age of 65 moved all of their money out of stocks just in the last few months. That's insane. That the economic impact, it's hard to even fathom. Literally, over, I think, 23% of small businesses, there is no one, the owners aren't working at this point, which means that's like taking 4 great recessions in the last 3 to 4 months. And so you go, the scale is significant. But when it comes to the market, the reason we saw this dramatic drop last Thursday, and we're still seeing volatility now, is that we keep getting new data in, and the market is pricing in this concept of whether we like it or not, there's a lot of increased cases right now, and not just increased cases because of testing, but increased hospitalizations as well. At least that's what the market's looking at. And you can take that and explain it from any number of reasons, but the point is, if the market thinks that the coronavirus is not under control, and then you add to that the reality that we still have thousands of protesters on the streets every day, President Trump planning a rally for this weekend with, he hopes, hundreds of thousands of attendees. It's as if Americans have said, we are comfortable going back out overall, but the virus is responding to that. And where that will take the market at this point, nobody really knows.
Well, Chris, one encouraging sign is Wall Street Journal has a report on the University of Michigan's index that looks at consumer sentiment, and it is up to 78.9 in the 2 weeks that ended on June 10th, and it's up from 72.3 for the previous report. So that is, what, a 6.6 point rise in consumer sentiment in the beginning of June. Now, that's, of course, a soft indicator. That's just showing what people are thinking. But that's at least an encouraging sign, I think, Chris.
Well, here's the issue in my mind, because I saw the same study. So the problem is that doesn't take into account much of last week, right? And what we saw last week was this gut punch of the market dropping dramatically. I mean, 6, almost 7% in most of the major indexes. And you go, well, why did that happen? Well, a big part of that was anxiety over the numbers. Whether that's justified or not, that's where we sit. And so my fear has been, we're in kind of one of two things will happen here. With all of the protests, like the reason I believe that we see consumer sentiment growing stronger, that we can get out and be about, is because if you're looking out and see thousands of people out every day, you go, well, why can't I go to the restaurant that I want to go to? Why can't I go back to a movie theater, jump on a plane? And if the virus stays in check, that could actually dramatically increase, I believe, how quickly we can recover, right? But the flip side is also true. If we happen to see, and if we're intellectually honest, we have to look at both sides of this, the virus expanding, then that could be what the CDC director, the CDC came out with a few days ago and said, look, if things keep getting worse, we're going to have to see more restrictions again. Now, the administration has said we're not willing to go back to shutting everything down. And I think economically, we can't go back to shutting everything down. That would be disastrous. But it's worrisome that in the last number of days, we've seen what looks like possibly a turn that's not in the direction we're hoping.
Vance Ginn, your thoughts on what Chris just said, but also from my perspective in terms of the idea of shutting things down again. Not only do I agree with Chris that economically we can't do that again, I don't think the American people will have it. There is a crisis of credibility that in the last month is even worse than it was back in March. And I don't see that millions upon millions of Americans will just say, sure, we'll accept what you're saying again.
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot of truth to that. And look, we all want cases to go to zero. We want the deaths to go to zero. I believe every life is precious. And so we want people to be doing better overall. But we've also got to be realistic about the situation. That as we continue to open up again and have more economic growth and people going back to the dignity of work, which is so important in our society, that we can't just lock people down. We are social beings. We're supposed to go around and meet with people. That's one of the beauties of economics, right? Is we're trying to study how people behave and look at financial markets and things of that nature. So we need to get back to our way of life and have those liberties and freedoms and prosperity that we love so much, while also addressing the key concerns with coronavirus and COVID. I mean, when you look at a lot of the cases and the deaths, that they're dominated by those that are 65 and older. I mean, maybe that's a way to look at how do you isolate, quarantine, and things of that nature. When you look at individual and family responsibility instead of turning to the government for assistance. I mean, look, I was at the White House the last year as the Associate Director for Economic Policy at the Office of Management and Budget, and it wasn't the White House that shut things down. We were providing guidance overall to where individuals could responsibly act. You really had the state and local governments that then decided to shut things down and got to the situation that we're in today. And so it's a matter of how do we get back to the place we were? I mean, just real quick, if you think about where we were in February, it's kind of mind-boggling to think to where we're at today. We had one of the best economies on record. The unemployment rate, 3.5%. Job creation was rapid. Income inequality, wealth inequality were falling. That's where we want to be again. We know what the steps are. We know the template of how to get back to there. It's a matter of getting there quickly, which I really believe that ending the shutdowns as quickly as possible is the best quote-unquote stimulus package that we could have.
Yeah. Well, you could look at the fact that in the month of May, 2.5 million jobs were created according to the Labor Department, and that could only come from reopening. It was more than anybody had anticipated. In fact, it was 8.3 million jobs lost. That was the estimate. Again, we're talking with Vance Ginn, chief economist at the Texas Public Policy Foundation, and Chris Burns, CEO of Dynamic Money. And Chris, to the point about small businesses and about the lockdowns, the National Bureau of Economic Research just came out with a report saying that 41% of black business owners disappeared from the data on business ownership. In other words, 41% of the of black-owned businesses are no longer around. For Latino businesses, 32%. For immigrants, 36% of those businesses are done for. And women, 25% of women-owned firms are no longer around. I mean, these are some startling statistics.
Beyond startling. I mean, we've never honestly seen anything like it since we've been reporting these kinds of things. Again, if you boiled it down, the Wall Street Journal did a good job. It took those numbers and said it's as if we experienced the impact of 4 great recessions in just a matter of months on small businesses. So there's no doubt, and I would be in agreement about this, we can't go back to that because human suffering it crosses both sides here. Obviously, the thought of more people dying from the virus is not anything anybody wants, but the thought of millions of people not being able to work and the years and years and years of impact that has is also not acceptable. I think the difficulty is we have to live in the tension, and we've been living in the tension, but we need leadership that comes forward and admits the tension and just says, hey, look, the reality is we don't have our arms entirely around where this is going yet. I mean, how many times have we seen the epidemiological numbers change and projections change, right? So we don't know exactly what this looks like. Here's what we know. We can't go back to shutdown. We want to do our best to protect our older Americans who are more at risk. Here's the best path we have going forward. And I think people would respond better to that kind of honesty than every time new numbers coming up saying, I think we have this under control, or we're heading towards Armageddon, because neither of those is reality.
Yeah, Vance Ginn, we like to quote the 19th century economist Frederick Bastiat on this program, and one of the things that he talked about was that which is seen and that which is not seen. And for months, we weren't seeing a lot of these effects because people were just focused on coronavirus and trying to stop the spread, and now we are seeing all of these different effects finally come to fruition.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. I love Bastiat's work, so thanks for bringing that up.
I figured you would.
Yes, but you're right. There's honestly so much that we haven't seen, and that will continue to come to fruition over time. Casey Mulligan, who's an economist out of the University of Chicago, he has this website, pandemiccost.com, that shows that right now there's been $1.7 trillion in costs, like cumulative cost from the pandemic, which it averages out to more than $14,000 per household of what their cost is. There's other researchers out of the Hoover Institution and Chicago's Booth School that show that the life years lost from COVID-19 has been about 800,000. But if you look at the life years lost from those that have been unemployed and the effects that that has on people's lives and mental health and suicides and things of that nature, along with the health risk of people avoiding the doctor's office and hospitals of getting cancer treatments and cancer diagnosis and things of that nature, they show that that's up to 1.5 million life years lost just within 2 months. So that's almost double, essentially double the amount from the COVID-19. Look, again, I think that every life is precious, and so we need to make sure that we're doing this in a responsible way. But by closing down the economy, you are avoiding the ingenuity, the innovation, and honestly, the amount of information that can be gained from the knowledge problem. Bring another great economist, Hayek, right? The knowledge problem that's out there, to where if the government feels like they know what the answer is, they don't have all the information from the marketplace itself. I mean, Chris knows a lot about the marketplace, and all of those indications that are giving you along the way are so important. And the more that we don't have that available throughout months or weeks or years, I mean, we just can't continue at that sort of pace and expect for us to have a prosperous economy.
So, Chris, let's talk a little bit about these market dynamics. We saw for days a rise in the stock market. It seemed like investors were very encouraged. Then we had this one-day significant drop, 1,800 points in one day on the Dow. Today, things are relatively flat as of this broadcast. But what do you make of these dynamics and sort of what investors are looking at and thinking about at this point?
Well, again, just as was just said, the idea that we're getting data now, we're starting to have the hard numbers, and you bring up the economic numbers. Well, the same thing's happening in the market. Even though every day we see what the market's doing, the way that Americans are responding to that, we're starting to see in larger numbers. And again, I'll just go back to that. So I think this is astounding, that if roughly a third of all Americans over the age of 65 removed themselves entirely from equities, they've sold off all their stock holdings in the last 2 to 3 months, that is unprecedented. And if you think about that for a minute, a lot of those people that are in retirement or nearing retirement, they're reacting out of fear, and it's fear that I understand. It makes sense why they'd have that gut reaction. But the problem is we live in a market-based economy now. You cannot live in retirement. We don't have the pensions that maybe our grandparents had, by and large. Some folks do, most don't. And so when you remove yourself entirely from the market, again, understandably out of reactivity, out of fear, how are you going to have staying power for the next 2 to 3 decades of your portfolio? And I assure you, a third of all folks over the age of 65 are not in some position where they can just live on cash. So my big fear is that the gut level reaction that a lot of people have moved towards is going to hinder them, because when the market does start really returning in a strong way, and we saw this after the Great Recession as well, folks that get out early, and a lot of these folks got out and lost a lot when they got out. They got out early on when we lost over 30% in the market. Folks that get out early are more inclined to have a hard time coming back in. So they miss all the benefits of the recovery that will come, and they lock in those losses of getting out. And so I'm concerned right now that people pause, take a deep breath, maybe reduce your risk level, but don't make an extreme decision to either be unbelievably conservative, or as the other group of folks I'm talking to right now, go, I'm behind, I'm going to risk everything to try and catch up. Either one of those is really going to hurt you long term right now.
Well, it's so sad too, Chris Burns, is that as we look at the last few months, we've seen devastating declines from the market highs we had last year, as recently as last year. And for 3 years, everybody who was invested at any level was benefiting from a gangbuster stock market that for most of the time, except during some trade war hiccups, just seemed like it was never going to stop rising.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And the hard part about this is, you know, anytime as a financial planner that I sit down with somebody and we're talking about risk tolerance, well, when you talk about how do you handle risk, but you're in the middle of the longest bull market in history, you're in an air-conditioned room, everything's kind of fine around you, then you feel comfortable saying, yeah, I'll take that level of risk. It's when this kind of a thing happens that you actually see how you feel about risk. And the problem is so many people swing to extremes here, and that is the most damaging long-term for your portfolio. So I truly think I worry about folks, especially in retirement or within 10 years of retirement, who have made a significant decision to move out and are now going to have to deal with, am I going to get back in? When am I going to get back in? And are they going to have the staying power to have the income they need throughout all of retirement? Because again, most of these folks, a lot of these folks made a decision out of fear, and an understandable fear, but they're going to have to figure out a time to take risk again and kind of balance that fear. It's that tension, balancing fear with actual data. And the data says, look, over the last few months, the NASDAQ a week ago was back in record territory, a week ago. And so even though we're going to keep seeing volatility, pulling entirely out of the market is a way to make sure that you don't have that growth to beat inflation long term and to make sure you can cover your income.
Chris Burns, again, CEO of Dynamic Money, joining us, as well as Vance Ginn, chief economist at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. Just a few minutes left with you, gentlemen, and I want to get to sort of a prescriptive perspective for a moment. Vance, from your public policy standpoint, what do you think are the things that the federal government in particular can and should do to help juice this economy, try to get things going again? And then also, what do you think it definitely should not do so that it doesn't hinder the recovery?
Yeah, so I think a big part of that for what not to do would be to continue to incentivize individuals not to work. I think we need to look at not extending the unemployment benefits of the additional $600, where more than 60% of people are paid more than that on average. So that incentivizes people to stay home, which may have been a good idea in the first month or so, or 2 months whenever you're shut down, but not when you're trying to recover an economy to get people to go to work. And they would still have unemployment benefits, as Larry Kudlow said earlier, from the state. It just wouldn't be that additional federal portion. We've also been looking at what's called the Workplace Recovery Act, which would be a way to get businesses part of their net operating losses, have those funds come from Congress and continue to keep them in business so that they can hire. A lot of businesses, and small businesses in particular, have had to shut their doors. They won't be hiring back, right? So that would be destroying job creation. How can we get them to keep their doors open? Maybe they're shut down and they can't go to work every day, but they at least have enough funds to keep them moving forward and be able to hire those workers back on. We're also looking at the payroll tax cut throughout the rest of the year as another way to put money into the hands of employers and workers along the way. And I think at some point too, we need to say, look, we don't need to continue to bail out states and give them more money. They've already received about $1 trillion if you look at what Congress has authorized through them and from the Federal Reserve. I mean, that just incentivizes a lot of these states to extend these shutdowns, whether or not they're needed. And along with continuing some of the poor fiscal management that's happened for years, maybe even decades before we got into this point, that should not be bailed out in that process. And so I think by a combination of looking at what's best for America, what's best for the American lives and livelihoods, we can get back to that growth rate of prosperity that we had not too many months ago, and even improve on that overall. I think one last thing, Jimmy, was the number of regulations that were suspended during this time at the federal and at state and local levels. Yes. I think those should be eliminated. If they're not good during a crisis, absolutely, why should they be useful at all?
I completely agree, and I made that exact point here on this show, Vance Ginn. Chris Burns, let's go to you for final thoughts from this standpoint. And you touched on some of these things before, but from an individual investor standpoint, what do you think people should be keeping in mind as far as things to do during this point in time and things not to do, mistakes to avoid?
So 2 things to think about. Well, one is that we have to understand that the market is about risk. It's always about risk, right? And not all risk makes sense. If I go up on the top of a building with a metal rod during a lightning storm, I am taking significant risk, but for what purpose, right? It's not a smart risk. In this case, though, the market, when you approach it correctly, you have to take some level of risk to get a reward, but you can do that intelligently. Please be wary of extremes in either direction. Of totally getting out, of becoming more aggressive, of hoping that your friend's brother's uncle's stock pick they told you about in Canada is the right pick for you to make you millions. A lot of folks are jumping into this kind of stuff right now, and it's worrisome, right? The ideal is you have consistent, steady, long-term approach with a risk that you can handle. So that's the first thing I would say is anytime that you feel your gut telling you to do something dramatic, it's probably good to get a second opinion and pull back a little bit. And the second thing is just as people are trying to go through this, recognizing that historically, when we see downturns, every time that you can point to in history, you see a significant uptick following that. In the last example, in the Great Recession, almost a 500% growth following that in the S&P 500. So even if you're in the midst of a downturn right now, just trusting that that will turn around. And as long as you stay invested and keep some money in the market right now, when it does turn around, it's going to go your way. And so understanding that you have history at your back here as well. It's not just this is all going to go down. It's going to be some sort of doomsday scenario that this is bad, but it's going to come back. And when it does come back, you want to be a part of that. That's what is the driver, the engine behind the growth you need long term.
And that's such an important point. Everybody needs to keep in mind the way in which the stock market has ebbed and flowed over history, and the trajectory has been higher and higher. Don't lose sight of that. We will be back into action at some point, so be smart. One of the things that I always suggest is just talk to a financial advisor. Make sure you're doing your research and not just making decisions based off of the headlines. Vance Ginn, Chief Economist of the Texas Public Policy Foundation, and Chris Burns, CEO of Dynamic Money. Thank you both so much. I really enjoyed this conversation. I knew it would be fun to get the two of your perspectives on this program today, and I'm glad we did. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Once again, Vance Ginn and Chris Burns, both joining us here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. And there are a few fundamental points that I think both of these gentlemen made that we must keep in mind. One, Chris's points about being smart and savvy in terms of your market decisions, not making rash decisions, recognizing that history is at your back, as he said, and it provides a guide. History also, by the way, provides a guide, going to some of Vance's points. History provides a guide that to bring back the economy, to get us strong once again, we need to unleash the unlimited potential of each and every individual. The private sector economy, let businesses start to get back into gear without impediments from government programs and regulations and restrictions and increased taxes, as we're seeing in New York State, or attempts in various parts of the country. I think Colorado's looking at that. There's certainly anti-business policies here in the state where we're broadcasting from. So lots of things to keep in mind from the perspective of not expanding government and instead getting it out of the way as well. I'm cautiously optimistic about the trajectory of the economy. We just need to keep those things in mind, to be sure. That is it for us today on this Monday morning. Thanks so much for joining us here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. We will be back tomorrow, back in action with engaging, intelligent talk, saying style. My thanks to the Washington Examiner, our partners here on the show, to producer extraordinaire Nathan Matouche, to guests Vance Ginn and Chris Burns for some great insights today, as well as, of course, Elmer, Fudd, and Yosemite Sam. We'll get that video up later on. Please be sure to subscribe. I appreciate you for watching and listening. YouTube.com/Jimmy at the Crossroads. Jimmy at the Crossroads on YouTube. We'll be back tomorrow. Have a great day. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger. May God bless America.